and if you've actually read your sewing machine manual. Anyone? Only me? Well, in that case, let's skip the dry reading and jump right into what you really need to know about your sewing machine to get sewing. Wait a minute, you forgot to tell them some important things. Like what? You know, those disclaimers. Oh, right. So one, you should know that not every machine has the same features, and some are specifically going to be limited to more advanced machines. Alright. Yeah. And two, they're not all gonna look the same. So you should probably tell them what they can do. If their machine doesn't look like yours. Yeah, well. Anyway, that's all that I wanted to say. Bye. Bye. So she's totally right. I'm going to be demonstrating on one type of computerized machine, and it's probably not going to look the same as yours, especially if you have a mechanical machine. But don't worry, all the basics of how to operate the machine are going to be the same, and you're still going to get a pretty good idea of what you need to know. Also, if you do have a mechanical machine, I do have a link to the blog post in the description below where I have diagrams specifically for mechanical machines, and there's also a handout that includes diagrams and labels for a variety of different types of machines. So you're definitely going to want to check that out. Also, stick around to the end because we're going to cover how to thread your machine and how to thread the bobbin. And while it might be a little bit different, that should give you an idea of where to get started. Just to start with super basics, this is the power cord. It's pretty difficult to get out, but which is good, and a little challenge to get back in as well. Then we have the foot pedal, which goes into the jack right here, and of course the power button, which also turns on the little light that you can see. And then of course we have the hand wheel, which means you can manually move the needle up and down as needed. Just a tip, you should always turn it this way. So on the top we have the handle, horizontal spool pin. On mine we have a spot for an auxiliary spool pin if your machine allows for that, a felt disc, spool pin cap, thread guide, and a bobbin winding guide, the thread take-up, bobbin winding tension disc, a bobbin winder shaft, a bobbin winder stop, and the thread tension control dial. This is the auxiliary spool pin, but let's pretend for a second that it is the horizontal spool pin. So the thread goes on it, and then, if it were long enough, the felt disc goes on that. And this just helps the thread turn smoothly. It also keeps it from making noise. Then you have the spool pin cap that goes on the end to keep the thread from coming off. So on the right side of the machine, we have our stitches panel. I'll come back to that in a minute. Here is the speed control adjustment. Now the speed control is a great feature because when I put it on the lowest bar of the graph, that means that it's going to go pretty slow, and no matter how hard I press on the foot pedal, it's not going to go any faster. This is great if you are just learning to sew and you're super intimidated by the speed of the machine. It's also really helpful when you're doing projects where extra care needs to be taken. That's typically when I use it, especially if I want the stitching to be really precise or it's like super close to an edge and it's going to be seen. But then it also gives you the ability to go faster when you just want to like, do a simple straight stitch and get it done, you know? Over here is a tacking button. When I press that, it will do a back stitch depending on the stitch. If it's on a straight stitch, it will do a back stitch. If it is set on an overcasting stitch, it will do like a tack. Kind of depends on the setting. Now these two buttons, I never use them because I use my foot pedal, but this allows the needle to come up and down automatically just with the press of a button. And then the start button, I can tell it to sew, and then I can press it again and it will stop sewing. So the automatic start, stop, and needle position is pretty cool. However, I've never used it. I just really like the control that the foot pedal gives, and those settings only really work when the foot pedal is not in. Now over here we have the LCD display, which shows the stitch number, the stitch width, and the stitch length. Now, down here, you'll notice there's different stitch patterns showing up here, and then there are 2-digit numbers assigned to each one. Now, you can pick a stitch that you want and adjust it here. Right now, it's set to the zigzag stitch. If I wanted it to be a straight stitch, then it will go back to 0. Another one that I use a lot is the overlock stitch, and so I just press that one right there. And then you can adjust the stitch width with this button and then the stitch length here. On the needle area here, we have the metal needle plate, the needle bar, and the needle clamp screw right here, which if we take our little screwdriver that came with the machine, that's how we get the needle out. You just twist that towards you. Needle comes out. It's a little easier when the presser foot isn't on the machine. And then you just put it back. Mine goes with the flat part towards the back of the machine, but your manual will tell you which direction it goes. And then just tighten that up. Right here there's a thread guide to thread the machine. Just guide the thread through there, and that keeps it close. And then I have the automatic needle threader. Loop that. Pull the thread back underneath here, and it pulls it through, and then it's just right on the other side there. You just have to kind of pull it through the rest of the way. Of course, this is your presser foot here and the presser foot release lever. On the other side, we have the presser foot screw. So in instances where you need to change the whole shank, which is this whole piece right here, then you just undo this. Loosen that up and this pops right off. Here's the full presser foot shank. In certain instances you will need to replace it. Right here are the feed dogs. These raise up and down when you move the needle to catch the fabric and move it along. We also have seam allowance measurements on both sides. It'll show you where you can line up your fabric. That helps a lot. There's also a 1/2 inch seam allowance mark right here on this clear bobbin case. Now, when I take the bobbin out, you just take this little bobbin cover release lever, and that pops out this cool cover. And then you can just take out the bobbin right here. In order to put the bobbin back, we just follow the guide on the machine right here. Just drop it in, take it through the hook path, just like the picture shows. Put the thread towards the back, and then put the cover back on. Now, to take off this needle plate and clean the machine, just start with taking out the bobbin cover, bobbin, take off the presser foot, that makes it easier, make sure the thread is towards the back, and then you can just undo the screws right here on the needle plate. It's a little bit tricky with these tiny little screwdrivers. You just remove the plate. Now on the inside, we have the bobbin case here, which comes out so that you can clean the machine. And then we have the hook brace and hook assembly right here. Also, this is where you would put your wheel. There's a spring right here. The rest of this is just kind of the internal mechanisms, but this is where you'd clean out a lot of lint. If you want to see a detailed video on how to clean your machine, let me know. And then you just put it all back. So to thread the bobbin, you just want to make sure that your bobbin thread is hanging out the back here. And then you want to take your top thread that's coming through the needle and just manually turn your needle up and down so that it comes through and grabs the thread. And then I always have to get something to kind of help feed it through. But there it is. Now to thread the machine, I recommend you hold the thread here, but then you're just going to follow the instructions on the screen right here. Put it through the hook. And then you just move it down here, and then it loops around this piece, and voila. And then down here, you just hook it in again to the heel guide and do the automatic needle threading. Some standard accessories that come with your machine are typically at least a starter bobbin, a machine needle, a screwdriver for the needle plate and presser foot, and then some starter presser feet, which usually includes the general purpose foot, zipper foot, and sometimes a buttonhole foot. Extra accessories that are often included with more advanced machines include additional bobbins, additional machine needles, more felt discs, spool pin tabs of various sizes, a darning plate, which just helps keep the frayed edges from getting in the machine, a seam ripper and lint brush, and sometimes an auxiliary spool pin. One other feature of your machine that you may have heard of is free arm sewing. You take off your accessory box here, and this is where you can keep your accessories. Then you have free arm sewing. You may also see an extension table listed as a feature, which also just kind of expands the workspace here. So,